Choose 3 topics you would like to learn more about: pregnancy, bullying, substance use, mental health, violence prevention, sexual health, LGBTQIA+, other. What are the 3 biggest issues you face in your community? So basically they just said, look, if your parents won't tell you about this stuff, you call my mama, she'll tell you. The state will tell you. I think that's despicable. And if you want to know why we're having the problems that we're having right now in schools and with parents, this is the reason why.
Without further ado, I want to bring my good friend, Jenni White, up. She has worked for many years. Those of you that worked with us to stop Common Core know that Jenni was one of our generals in that fight, and we fought well together, side by side. We fought many battles over the course of time, and like I said, we became good friends probably starting back about 2009, 2010. And we've watched each other's kids grow up, and she outdid me. She homeschooled. I didn't. I left mine to the wolves, I guess. And she's done a lot of work on education because that's where her passion is, and she's passionate about people's rights and about parents' rights. And you know, she brought it to my attention a couple of weeks ago that back in 2014, when we supposedly stopped Common Core, that they had also passed the Oklahoma Bill of Rights for parents Bill of Rights. And I'd completely forgotten about that. And so I think she's going to come up and talk about some of the things that are going on, some of the ways that we can take a stand, and what we can do to get our education back on track and where it belongs. So please join me in welcoming Miss Jenni White. Almost like Vanna White, but not so sparkly.
Everything about me is getting white anymore. Okay, first of all, for those of you who are parents, the one thing that I really want to tell you right now is please don't ever forget that they're your kids and they're nobody else's kids. And that's absolutely the very first place that we've got to begin. This isn't going to be a real happy, fun presentation tonight. I'm sure I'll be snarky and ugly as usual, so you'll have to forgive me. But I started going through the Oklahoma State Department of Education website the other day, and honestly, I know I was going to look for something, but then what ended up happening was I tripped and fell into this rabbit hole, and then I couldn't get out of it. And what I found made me so mad, and I have this feeling it's going to make you mad too, so we're going to talk about it today. I made this roadmap of what was on the website because I just wanted to know where it was, because the one thing about the Oklahoma State Department of Education website is once you get on it and you click a link, it's super hard to go back and find out where it was. So you could rail all day about, I saw this on the website, and somebody's going to go where, and you're going to go, no, I don't know, somewhere. So I tried to make it as easy to find as possible by kind of doing this little roadmap. And I made this roadmap that actually has live links in it. And if you go to the blog that has the picture on it, you can pull up the PDF and then actually go and click on all of the links in the photo so that you'll know where you're going. Okay, the 4 things that we're going to talk tonight about are, number 1 is social emotional learning. Anybody heard of this before, SEL? Okay, we're going to talk about that. Number 2, we're going to talk about the American School of Counselor, or the American School Counselors Association. Anybody ever heard of that? Boy, you may be my friend. You're not gonna, okay. And number 3 is the Youth Risk Behavioral Surveys. I hope more than one person in here's heard about these. These are disgusting. And number 4, school climate surveys. Our fearless leader a minute ago said something about it's all about money. Trust me when I say everything in education is about federal dollars. So everything you're going to see on here tonight has to do with federal dollars. All right, so let's talk about this first. Let's talk about social emotional learning. The OSDE website is just saturated with SEL. They've bought into it hook, line, and sinker, and they absolutely, it's in everything. It's like a virus that just infected everything. The great thing about SEL is it's actually funded by all of the people who have given you all of the educational garbage to this point. So guess who? Bill and Melinda Gates. Oh yeah, never heard of them before. Yeah, okay, well, I was going to go say something even meaner, but I'm not. I'm actually going to be quiet and move on. The whole idea from SEL stems from this guy named Daniel Goleman, who came up with 5 tenets about basically how you learn to control your own actions using your emotions, okay? So isn't that a little backward? I think that's the first thing that popped into my head. I was like, my mother never said, think about, you better act like this. I mean, you had to, it wasn't about emotions. It was about deciding, using your thought processes to understand how to behave. So there are 5 components: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and they're all driven by emotions, not anything else. So parents, and this is my big thing, we abdicated. I read an article this weekend that was a very short article, but I meant to bring it with me today because it was wonderful, and it was not documented, which I'd like to go back through and document it because people will say, that's not true, that's not true. But she talks about how in the 70s, the women's movement basically got women into the workforce, and as women went into the workforce, daycares burgeoned. There were just daycares shot up. And what ended up happening after that is one of my favorite people who did the 2 worst things ever. One of them was no-fault divorce, and the other part was not killing Jimmy Carter's Department of Education. So Reagan signed the no-fault divorce thing, however that worked. And so what we ended up having was, in the 70s, was the beginning of what we called latchkey kids, where there was nobody at home raising these kids. They were pretty much doing it by themselves. And what we have now are parents who have gotten so used to not having their kids at home that, number 1, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing with them. Number 2, they don't know anything about them. And number 3, they don't understand how to get any information out of them when they come home. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But parents, you're the one that needs to be teaching your children how to manage their emotions, not a school. Because what's going to happen when the school teaches your kid how to manage their emotions is it's going to be for something that they want to, they're going to direct them in a way, because I think I put a scripture in here because it fits so well with SEL. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Why would we, if that's the case, why would we think about anything just in terms of emotions? And the other problem is this. We talk about propaganda, and I don't think we really understand what propaganda is. Propaganda is anything that's written that appeals to your emotions in a political way. So think about this. If the definition of propaganda basically is something that appeals to your emotions, that's how it makes you act, right? So how does SEL not open our kids up to just devouring propaganda because they're running on nothing but emotions? So that's a huge thing. So when you hear SEL, when you hear social emotional learning, don't buy into this garbage of, well, we're helping kids learn how to manage their emotions better. No, it's not. And by the way, nothing pure is done for money. I'm just going to say that because I believe it to be a fact. If you have to get paid for to do something, I mean, how pure exactly is that? All of this ties back into federal funding. All of this SEL stuff does. All right, so this was the next 3 slides are about a guy in Utah. He was a teacher, and he resigned because his school started using SEL. Well, he specifically was upset because of this program called Second Step. Well, guess what's on the OSDE website? Second Step. So here's what he says. The material which teaches students that their parents are roadblocks to their goals, material which contains propaganda and encourages students to become activists, among other things. This is in his resignation letter to his school. I'm especially uncomfortable with the anti-family undertones I found in the Second Step curriculum. And then he says, in the end, my concerns were that his administration, when he gave him the resignation letter, and he actually didn't just say, I don't like it, end of discussion. He sat down and absolutely went through the curriculum and said, this is a problem for this reason, this is a problem for this reason, this is a problem for that reason. His administrators just looked at him and went, well, thank you so much for bringing that to our attention, but it really works great around here, and we're going to keep it. Oh, and by the way, we're going to force you to teach it. So if you say, we're going to force you to teach it, it's kind of like my take on the vaccine. If they have to force you to take it, don't know. Here's the thing that really bothered me, because one of the things that I'm going to tell you about tonight, which is absolutely imperative for you, which is to look over all of the curricula, and you have a right to do that according to the parental rights law in this state. You cannot see things, or they tell you, pardon me, your administrators will tell you, well, this is copyrighted material and you're not allowed to look at it because it's copyrighted. Wrong. No. You are allowed to look at anything that your child sees. According to the law, you are allowed to see anything. But here's what he says. Because Second Step is a copyrighted program requiring a purchase license to access the content, parents can only review the lessons being taught to their students by going into the district office and having district personnel show it to them. And they weren't even opting anybody out. Oklahoma State Department of Education website does provide Second Step as a teacher resource. I think that's huge. All right. These are screenshots. If you've followed me at all, you know that I absolutely refuse to opine about anything. If I'm going to tell you about something, it's because I have absolute knowledge that it's happening, because I've taken screenshots and I can show you the URLs. This is a screenshot from the Oklahoma State Department of Education resources. You have to go through several resources to find some of these things, but this is what it says about SEL. If we had to name one takeaway from Castle's update to the definition of social emotional learning, it's this: SEL and equity are interwoven. And we're going to talk more about HB 1775 in a minute, and what about critical race theory and anti-racist training. Any conversation about social emotional learning is also a conversation about equity. While SEL alone will not solve long-standing and deep-seated inequities in the education system, it can create the conditions needed for individuals and schools to examine and interrupt inequitable policies and practices, create more inclusive learning environments, and reveal and nurture the interests and assets of all individuals. How do you do that? If we're all individuals, how in the world can anybody nurture our assets? I mean, so they say things and they use a lot of buzzwords, and then when you break them down, they actually mean nothing. Everything they say means absolutely nothing. It's like a word salad with really bad dressing. Supporting student, staff, and the school community has always been complex and multifaceted. In our current context, true leadership requires reimagining the way in which we address unconscious biases in schools. Unconscious biases. That's a big thing. So if I do something and somebody else believes it's a bias, but I don't believe it's a bias, we're at a stalemate, right? But then I'll lose, because the person will just say, no, it's an unconscious bias. You still have it. It's bias, but it's unconscious. Well, no. Foster social emotional learning, intend to student and staff members' mental health and emotional well-being, integrated SEL skills into educational experience with a focus on equity is more important than ever before. And then when you go on to what's transformative SEL, well, think about that for a second. Transformative SEL. We're going to transform your kids. That's basically what it says. Sorry, we don't really like them the way they come in. So we're going to have to transform them and turn them into something else that's more socially responsible. And don't forget that word because it's super important. Okay, so here's what they say. Transformative SEL is a process through which students and teachers build strong, respectful relationships founded on an appreciation of similarities and differences, learn to critically examine root causes of inequity, and develop collaborative solutions to community and social problems. It is a form of SEL anchored in the notion of justice-oriented citizenship and intended to promote equity and excellence among children, young people, and adults. That sounds great, but what's the definition of equity? There are two things that we need to deal with here, equity and equality, okay? Equity is everybody having the same outcome, right? That's what equity is. There's a picture that they use a lot on the web, and it's a picture of 3 different heights of kids or people standing behind a fence, right? And one person has 2 boxes and he's standing so he can see up, but then the other person can just barely see up, and then the little kid can't see at all. So we have to take away this guy's box to give it to somebody else so that they can see, so that everybody's equitable, right? Equality doesn't offer equal outcomes, it offers equal input. You should have the same amount of opportunity that everybody else does, but what you do with that opportunity depends on what your outcome is, not somebody else giving you an outcome. That's what equity is. We have to structure everything to make sure that everybody comes out the same. You can't possibly do it. It will never happen. It's pie in the sky, unicorns jumping over rainbows to find the pot of the gold at the end of it. It's simply not possible. I think here's what it says. In practice, it's an approach to SEL that allows practitioners to effectively address privilege, prejudice, discrimination, social justice, and self-determination in K-12 settings. It requires an explicit examination of the root causes of racial and economic inequities in hopes of fostering justice-oriented self-awareness, social awareness, and responsible actions, both individual and collective, in students. In this way, transformative SEL can act as a lever for equality by elevating students alongside adults as experts in shaping more equitable, just, and inclusive worlds. Okay, first of all, that makes my head spin, because really, what in the end does that actually mean? They make it sound like it's the best thing ever. But what you're talking about is K-12 schools. The original CRT was all done in colleges. In colleges, I know because I have several college kids. In college, you should have a pretty good knowledge of self by that time. At least have a little better worldview. Kids in K-12 not only don't have a developed worldview, they don't have a developed sense of self. Think about, my gosh, people, I taught 7th grade. You want to see some crazy kids, some just flat weird children? Look at 7th grade. They have no idea what they're doing. They don't know whether they're coming or they're going or they're growing or they have no idea. And yet we're going to talk these kinds of issues with those kids. You know, we don't seem to understand in education, we talk a lot about developmental appropriate, things being developmental appropriate. None of this is developmentally appropriate for anybody outside of about an 18-year-old person and up. And when people get mad at me and they say, well, this is just silly, you shouldn't complain about, okay, I don't care. We can have racial discussions all day long. I don't really care. That's not a problem for me. I'll discuss anything you want to, any hour of the day, but we're talking about children. When children don't have, it's too easy to program a child because they simply don't have that kind of self-awareness, and they think they're going to teach them this. Okay, so this is another thing, and before we get into the school counselors invested in ideology, I want to just bring this to your attention. So we did pass a bill to stop the teaching of critical race theory, which was HB 1775. In the bill, because there was a lot of discussion about it, most people don't read the bill. In the bill, there were very specific things that you couldn't teach. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partially because of his or her race or sex. Members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. An individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race, or meritocracy or traits such as a hard work ethic are racist or sexist or were created by members of a particular race to oppress members of another race. That's very specific. I mean, people were saying, well, how can I not teach? Well, I would hope you wouldn't teach any of that any day of the week. If we want to truly have equality, we're all going to have to look at ourselves as equals, and certainly, if we're Christians, as equals under Jesus Christ, which said that, who said that there is not Jew or slave or anybody else. We were all together as a family. We've got to look at that. This is simply nonsense. So the school counselors invested in ideology. They have the ASCA has a very large presence on the OSDE website. They have a Counselor Speak newsletter, and there are numbers of them, but the one I looked at was the last one, which is in June. And it's just everything that they talk about is just infused with SEL and racism. I mean, so the ASCA, this is the ethical standards for school counselors, call for school counselors to be systemic change agents. See, that's communist. That's just flat communist. If you're going to call yourself a change agent, you're a Marxist or a communist. There is no other way to describe that terminology. I'm sorry, and you can call me whatever you want. I'm a big girl, but that's not, I'm sorry, Google it. No, don't Google it. I hate Google. DuckDuckGo it. Yes. Yeah. Who embrace their roles as advocates, leaders, and collaborators. So there are collaborators in systemic change by providing equitable, not equal, see, we've got the word again, equitable education access and success. All educators, especially school counselors, have an obligation to work toward mitigating and or ending racism and bias in an effort to lessen the impact of systemic racism on student development. So they just basically said that they believe in systemic racism. So if they believe in systemic racism, how can you not be a racist? How can you just not pick somebody to be a racist? And this really particularly bothers me because I have two children that were adopted from Zambia, Africa. And I wrote an article for the Federalist one time about the fact that a lot of their black peers were the ones that were bullying them. I mean, you talk like you're white, all that kind of stuff. And I wrote an article about it. I absolutely crushed the internet with it because, and I had a Twitter account at the time. I don't anymore. Twitter is a cesspool. But because I adopted black children, I was a racist. I was a white supremacist. I couldn't even conceive, and I made the mistake of saying, well, that I was a colorblind person, and this, I never even thought about the fact that they had a color. They were just kids that needed a home. So, and then I was faulted for that. How that in itself made me so angry. I thought, wait a minute, that's almost causing racism. I mean, because then I thought, well, if that's the way, I'm seen by people of color, I just can't go any place where people of color are. This can't happen. We're all individuals, and it makes no difference what we look like on the outside. It just flat doesn't. And I don't care what people say, but this bothers me because I think this is what is bringing about the stuff that caused me to crack the internet. All right, so here's another thing that I pulled off. This was directly off of the website. The Counseling Division of the Oklahoma State Department of Education supports the American School Counselor Association's position on equity and diversity in serving Oklahoma students. Well, what did I just read you? They're to be change agents. So our State Department of Education is happy to have counselors who are change agents in the school. Please notice that it says on their resources, there's a CASEL, which is SEL. It's the larger group that started SEL in the first place. So now you've got SEL and the school counselors together. So inside their newsletter, they have diversity and equity, not equality, equity resources. And they have racial intelligence training and engagement. Right. I went out and looked at that, and it was basically done in police departments, like a racial sensitivity training is what that was. Teaching tolerance is something called, they've changed their name, now they're Learning for Justice. It's full of all of this same stuff we've been talking about. Now, look at the bottom, ASCA mindsets and behaviors. That's another thing we're going to talk about. So the ASCA has created this set of mindsets, and think about that just a second. Mindsets and behaviors. So you turn your kid off, you take your kid to school, you drop him off. I would hope, because I'm promising you, I indoctrinated my kids in a lot of propaganda, in Christian propaganda, in being good people. I did the whole thing. I don't want somebody changing their mindset. I pretty much had an idea of where I wanted it to go until they were old enough to think for themselves. I don't need you doing my job for me because I pretty much can do it by myself. So if you've got they're very open about saying that this is what they want to do. They want to change mindsets and behaviors. And you can look at a lot of these things, and honestly, they're laudatory. Don't forget, I was a public school teacher for almost 10 years. I always had problems in my classrooms with a couple of kids, but it was never that big of a deal, and you could always just kind of talk to them and work it out. This is not that. I never tried to change the mindset of the kids in my classroom to so here's what I just pulled out kind of the bottom ones. Learning strategy, self-management skills, and social skills are the categories that they're building up these mindsets and behaviors. So on the social skills, it says advocacy skills for self and others and ability to assert self when necessary. Okay. Nobody wants a kid getting bullied on the school playground. I agree. But whose job is that to teach that? Is that the school or the parent? I'm sorry, I vote for the parent. Social maturity and behaviors appropriate to the situation and environment. I can promise you this. I took my kids places, and when my kids were little, I was on the speaking circuit going around with Common Core all the time. They had to sit at a table and do Legos or something but be quiet. And they did what I asked them to do because they knew if they didn't do what I asked them to do, they would lose a privilege when they got home. That was I don't need anybody to do that for me. See, my kids should come to your classroom and behave. Now, I'm not saying that every parent does that. And I know from being a teacher that not every parent does that, and I understand that. But it's still not the teacher's job to mold children. It's to teach children. There's a big difference between those two things, teaching and molding. There's a lot of molding going on and very little teaching. And you can tell that because the NAEP scores were just recently released. And Oklahoma has people that are barely proficient in reading and math. So you would think maybe, why would we be doing all of this if they can't even read a book or add? So here's the other thing I want to point out to you. Note that at the bottom, created by ACT, Achieve, Learning for Justice, Castle, Partnership for 21st Century Skills, National Board of Professional Teaching Standards. All of these people were the ones that we fought with Common Core. They just keep coming up with things because it's the tail wagging the dog. And I want you to be very clear about this. It is absolutely the tail wagging the dog. The federal government says, here's what we want you to do. And guess what? We're going to give you money to do it. So they go out and go, okay, we'll do what you want to do and we'll take money for it. And then they say, oh, but you got to do it the way we got to do it. But we'll give you some more money to do it just exactly the way we do it. All right, these are ridiculous. Youth risk behavior surveys, and they are resources on our OSDE website. You need to know this. There is something that many people don't know about is the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, the PPRA. The PPRA actually protects parents in the case that their kids were given any analysis or a survey or an evaluation that revealed behaviors, beliefs of students regarding politics, mental health, sex, illegal, self-incriminating, or demeaning behavior. Any of these kinds of things, if a kid gets that in class, that and the parent hasn't been notified and it comes from the Department of Ed, then they're in trouble. And you can literally get an attorney to file a lawsuit, a civil rights lawsuit against your school for doing that. And you need to know that because we need to find attorneys who are going to be and parents who are going to be willing to sue these people because they don't care about you. They just care about doing what they want to do so they can get their money, right? So the problem with YRBS is that they're not funded. They get around the whole PPRA by having it come from the CDC and the state health department website, and that's what it is. They're usually administered in the spring of odd number years, so your kid or your grandkid may have already had it and it's been done with, but I put a couple of these in here. They're going to be hard to read, I think, so I'm going to read it for you. Have you ever been physically forced to have sexual intercourse when you did not want to? During the past 12 months, how many times did anyone force you to do sexual things that you did not want to do? Count things such as kissing, touching, or being physically forced to have sexual intercourse. This is given to your kids as young as 6th grade. The last time you had sexual intercourse with an opposite sex partner, what one method did you and your partner use to prevent pregnancy? I have never had sexual intercourse with the opposite sex partner. No method was used to prevent pregnancy. Birth control pills do not count. Emergency contraception such as Plan B or the morning after pill, condoms and IUDs such as Mirena and Paragard, or an implant such as Implanon or Nexplanon, a shot such as Depo-Provera, patch, and I'm reading this because I want you to know what your kids see. An 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid who should have no freaking concept of this in the world gets to come home with that stuck in their head. A shot, okay, withdrawal or some other method. Would you like to know how many times I discussed the withdrawal method with my kids when they were in middle school? 0 times. during your life, with whom have you had sexual contact? I've never had sexual contact. Females, males, males, and females. Had to get the gamut. Which of the following best describes you? Heterosexual, gay or lesbian, bisexual. I describe my sexual identity some other way. I'm not sure about my sexual identity questioning. I do not know what this question is asking. Okay, so I told you I adopted a couple of girls. Well, I have a child that's 39, and then my next one is now 24. She is she's in the National Guard right now at Fort Bliss, and she needs your prayers. Her name is Barbara. Please pray for her. She's just struggling, and they want to vaccinate her. So just please pray for her. But that kid and me went around and around. She, bless her heart, she had a tough time. It would take forever to go into the whole story, but let me just tell you this. That kid never did a thing I wanted her to do. She ran away from home. One time she ran away from home to Texas. We had serious issues with this child. That's why this story is really funny. So in 7th grade, we put her in Belle Isle Elementary, or Belle Isle Middle School, which is in Oklahoma City. Now, she had grown up with me saying this and this and this and this. We don't do this in school. You can imagine having me as a parent. It's a wonder they still love me, but thank God they do. So I had just said something to her, to all of them, I think, but specifically to her. And I said, look, I just was looking at these surveys and they come out in middle school. And if you ever get a survey like that, you tell your teacher, my mama says, I am not allowed to take that. You turn a face down on the desk, put your head down and call it a day and tell me when you get home. I never heard anything about it. And then one day she comes home and she goes, Mom, I got one of those surveys. I said, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. And she said, no, and I did exactly what you told me to do. I put it face down, told the teacher you wouldn't let me take it, and went to sleep. And I went, praise God, you did one thing I asked you to do. So I mean, it does happen. It does come home. These, I just can't tell you. I mean, these were just a few of the questions. The questionnaire is 21 pages, people. It's 21 pages. There's just the same kind of stuff that's on 21 pages. So you have got to go out. You've got to tell your grandchildren. You've got to tell your kids. You've got to tell whoever you can tell. This is not something that they should, and you have to educate your kids, because I promise you, your school is not going to send. Did I ever get a letter sent home saying this was going to happen? No, I absolutely did not. No. You're not going to get a letter sent home. You better indoctrinate your children to say no, 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 thank you, no. All right. Here's our last point. School climate. Are you trying to get up and down, Amanda? I'm sorry.
You're done. I have a comment.
Okay, because I was going to say, are you exercising or are you?
I can hardly sit still.
Trust me, you don't even want to know what I was thinking when I was doing this. Okay, school climate surveys and screenings. School climate surveys are a part of the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is President Obama's reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Just about everything that you're going to find that's bad in schools comes from this. And there's tons of money tied to it. I mean, tons and tons of money tied to it. But guess what? They don't get their money if they don't get their data. So guess who they go to get the data? Your children, okay? So here's some things that are gonna make you really super excited. So this is their screening tool, and I'll read it to you again, because again, I know it's very small. I was hoping we'd have a big screen. I could blow it up a little bit. But this is a screening tool that a teacher is to fill out on your child, and they turn that screening the screen into the principal, who then turns it into the State Department of Education, who then turns it on to the federal government. Here's what your teacher wants to know about your kid, or these are the things that she can screen in your child. These are the attributes she can give your child. Stealing, lying, cheating, sneaking, behavior problem, peer rejection, low academic achievement, negative attitude, aggressive behavior, emotionally flat, shy, withdrawn, sad, depressed, anxious, lonely, steal, cheat. This is middle and high school, so that was elementary school. That was elementary school. Do you know any kid who didn't steal something in elementary school? That's how I learned not to cheat. Not to steal, because I got my bottom burned good. That was the last time I did that. Middle and high school. Steal, cheat, lies, cheat, sneak, behavior problems, peer rejection, low academic achievement, negative attitude, aggressive behavior, peer rejection, emotionally flat, shy, withdrawn, sad, depressed, anxious, lonely. Would you like any of your people to be labeled by any of these things? I'm just curious. One of the reasons why I homeschooled is I have a kid who has, he's an anxious kid. I knew that if I put him in a public school, that it would be forever people putting him in a category, and that's all they would get out of him, and that's all he would be. If you're not going to tell me this isn't pigeonholing kids, you are wrong, and I will fight you in the parking lot. This is nothing but categorizing children. Children, stop children. See, children become adults. They make a lot of mistakes along the way. Trust me when I say nobody liked me when I was a kid. Nobody. I was a horrible child. I have a saint for a mother, and I was the worst child on the face of the planet. I managed to do okay. How you can do that to a child is beyond despicable to me, because here's what's going to happen. That information's going to get out. The next teacher somewhere down the line, oh, well, I'm not going to deal with that kid because I know he's anxious, and or I know he's this, or that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. Makes me so mad. I bet you can't tell. Oh, well, yeah, let's not get started on that one, because that will make me even madder. Yes, data backpacks. All the data goes with you everywhere you want. Yay. Okay, these are school surveys from what they call OK Transform. Doesn't that sound exciting? It's a whole new thing. It's like a butterfly. It's going to go into a little chrysalis and it's going to transform. It's nothing like that. So here is the OK Transform survey, and they have to do this because you get money from ESSA for having a good school climate. You know how schools have grade cards? School climate's figured into the grade card. Well, how do you know if you have a good school climate? Well, you don't unless you make up a bunch of stupid questions and ask kids, okay? That's how you determine. So I'm going to read to you some of these because you'll love these too, because I know you like the last ones. All right, so please select the option that most describes how you feel. This category here, I can kind of understand. This makes some sense to me. I feel my school has high standards for achievement. I feel successful at school. I like school. My school sets clear rules for behavior. Teachers treat me with respect. I think that's reasonable. I mean, they're just giving you an assessment of what they see. That's reasonable. I don't have a problem with that. It's when we get to the next page that comes the problem. Prevention program questions. Do you know what consent means? During the past 12 months, have you experienced sexual activity when you didn't want to? During the past 12 months, did your dating partner ever hit, slap, or physically hurt you? And I better be the first to know that, because I'm going to hit, slap somebody else. See what I'm saying? I don't need the school to know. I need to come that needs to come to me directly. Have you experienced some form of stalking in the past 12 months? Do you currently receive sexual health information? If so, from where? Parents, friends, school, social media. And by the way, this is the thing that makes me mad. So if you ever want to use this on me, watch me get mad. Well, but Jenny, it's not as though they're not exposed to that over social media. I don't care. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me whether they're exposed to it over social media or not. Now, I, again, train my kids. If you're going to look at that on social media, I'm cutting you off. Wi-Fi goes off. If that's what I'm going to see in your feed, you're done with that. We'll move on. Again, guess what? My thing, right? I'll deal with it the way I want to deal with it. They're all pretty much adults now, and they still, fortunately, they'll tell me if they find something in their feed. Ew, Mom, I saw this gross thing. It's great. But yes, you're right. So if you train them right, hey. Social media, it does. You can find all kinds of gross smut on social media. That doesn't excuse the school doing it too. So don't tell me two wrongs make a right and then look at me with this condescending, look like, well, Jenny, I don't care. Two wrongs don't make a right, and this isn't appropriate in school. End of discussion on that topic. Do you have someone you trust that you can turn to when you feel unsafe or need to talk about your feelings? Yes, it's called my parent. Do you feel like your school supports and affirms your identities? I don't know if you know this, but there are actually children going to school dressed as animals right now. Okay, I guess. Have you experienced feeling down, sadness, or hopelessness more days than not in the last 30 days? Do you feel like your school is inclusive of individuals regardless of difference in identities, ability, age, race, gender, orientation? Do you feel like your school is diverse? Have you experienced some form of digital abuse in the last 12 months? Now, I'm serious. Does any of this go on at school? I was going to say it, because I'm so mad. How does this have anything to do with school climate? I still can't figure that out. The first couple of things I read to you sounded like what? School climate. Why do you need to know about my kids' sex habits, which they better not have, by the way? And now you may have just introduced something to them. So then at the end, choose 3 topics you would like to learn more about: pregnancy, bullying, substance use, mental health, violence prevention, sexual health, LGBTQIA+, other. What are the 3 biggest issues you face in your community? So basically they just said, look, if your parents won't tell you about this stuff, you call my mama, she'll tell you. The state will tell you. I think that's despicable. And if you want to know why we're having the problems that we're having right now in schools and with parents, this is the reason why. So what's a parent to do? I have a handout that I'm going to give you so that you can have it when you leave. And I want you to take as many of them as you can to hand them out to other parents. Download the Oklahoma Parental Bill of Rights. It's on our website. It's super easy to find, and ours is just www.rope2.org, and it's on there. You can just download it right off the website. You don't even have to go find it legislatively. But know this, that the opening statement in that bill says all parental rights are reserved to a parent of a minor child without obstruction. Hear that. Without obstruction. So the only person that's causing the obstruction is you. If your happy little behind isn't in that office saying, I want this and this and this, you are the only obstruction to your child's figuring out what your child has. There is no obstruction according to the law or interference from this state, any political subdivision of this state, or any other governmental entity or institution. Download Title 25, 2003 School District Policy on Parental Involvement, because it outlines both the rights parents have to see the materials that are being used, and it outlines the way that you're supposed to do it. Now, I've taken it out of the law and I've given it to you in blogs that I have on there. And the handout that I'm going to give you has all the blog addresses and everything, so you can go right to it and find it. It won't be hard, I promise. Okay. This is something that people don't understand, and just like in the military, there's a chain of command. There actually is a chain of command in your school, and you're going to end up, you may still not get the best results, so don't say, oh, you told me, because you may not get the best results this way. But what I'm telling you is they have no excuse if you use this. They can't say, well, I didn't hear about that. Or you only told your teacher. Or they can't do that. So do what you can to give them no ground to... ground? What was that? Ground. I'm just going to start talking in a different voice now, I guess. Do everything you can not to give them ground to stand on. You eliminate their ground by doing everything you're supposed to do. So the chain of command is you go to the classroom teacher first before you do anything else. If you don't get satisfaction there, you go to the school principal. If you don't get any satisfaction there, you go to the district superintendent. If you don't get any satisfaction there, you go to the school board. If you don't get any satisfaction there, you can go to the state superintendent or the state school board. But I don't know that they're going to help you because they're not local. They're not I'm telling you what the chain of command is. That's eventually where it goes. But what I'm saying is you need to make your school board do what they're supposed to do. And by the way, interesting story about school boards. One of the things we're working on is running a bill next year to determine how elected school board members are taught. Because there's a state law that says they have to have a certain amount of education to be a school board member, okay? Well, the people who are supposed to be giving this instruction is the Oklahoma State School Boards Association. Well, the Oklahoma State School Boards Association is not your friend, and neither is COSA, the superintendents, their union. They're not either. So what ends up happening is they kind of indoctrinate school board members into the wrong way of thinking. And I know this happens because I know a girl who was seated on a school board. And I called her and I said, hey, did you go through that training? Did you? Yeah, I went to OSSBA and we had the training. And I said, that's great. I'm just curious. Give me one thing. Give me your one takeaway from that training if you had one. And she said, well, we learned that the superintendent basically is right and we just need to do what the superintendent says. And I went, no. That's not what your job is. So I had to spend several minutes on the phone with her saying, no, that's actually not the job. You hire and, by the way, fire the superintendent when they don't do what you want. But what happens is our State School Boards Association basically propagandizes these people to figure that all they're supposed to sit there and do is go, yes, superintendent, no, superintendent, whatever you want, superintendent. Wrong. It's wrong. We've got to fix that problem. All right, so what else can you do? Talk to the teacher responsible if the teacher's unresponsible. And here's the thing that I figured out the other day. The OSD, they have all these bullying programs because, again, guess what? You get paid for having bullying programs. They have all of these bullying programs, and they actually have a bullying form on the website. So I'm like, download the bullying form website, fill it out, and turn it on your teacher. A bully's a bully. It doesn't matter who it is, right? So that's what you need to do. I've got all the instructions here for you to figure out how to do that yourself. Please do it and pass it on. So with basically, if a resolution is still lacking, work with other parents to contact one of the groups above committed to assisting parents. And there's a blog that tells you several, like Liberty Council, for example, there are several national groups that are kind of stepping in on the school boards thing and are willing to help parents, and you just need to find them and use them. But do know this, that if your child is, or your grandchild is told any of these things that we've been hearing, that they're bad because they're white, or they were responsible for genocide or something, that's a civil rights violation. And unfortunately, the Biden administration is not going to fill out the paperwork to give, to do a civil rights violation, but it still is, and you can use that. All right. Here's something else you can do. Run for your school board. Do you know that you have to actually file in December for school board? Please file. Run for school board. Or you can homeschool. Boy, look at how homeschooling shot up in 21. Don't tell me COVID wasn't good for something. All right. Here are my last words to you. You are the boss. They are your schools and your kids. You pay for the schools. You send your kids to them. Do what you have to do to make them work for you. And I'm done. Okay, questions? I always stop on a dime.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Makes your blood boil. Number one, I think kids should be out of public schools. It's a swamp and it's very far gone. But that's my opinion. I can't get my grandkids out, but I'm still working on that one. The second one is on those surveys and the other questionnaires like that, is what I see is the application of computer systems thinking applied in the education system. Input, they do testing, check the output. If it's not the proper output, then they go back to reconfigure so they get a standard outcome.
That's right.
Which is uniformity of belief and because we're nothing but data sets for them, or your kids are, because you're just a human resource, okay? That's all they are in a global economy. The other thing is, when are we going to stop holding up and elevating teachers in these public school systems as to an elevated position? Well, they were a teacher. They're change agents. And anybody that gives a survey that was that suggestive to sexualize children is morally responsible for all the damage that's caused. And anybody who is a person of conscience should not give out that survey. So the burden of responsibility is not on a child who has a soft-shelled little turtle in there. It is on the adult in the classroom. So I think the whole mindset about protecting teachers and elevating them into this special little category of person, they're a change agent and morally culpable for what's happened in our country. Well, and I just think that we need to just have a whole nother turnaround here, is to hold the teachers accountable. That's the adult.
Well, I can't tell you the number of teachers that I've talked to, because, you know, our superintendent constantly says, we don't have enough teachers, because you run the good ones off. They don't want to administer these surveys. They don't want to spend their whole day taking a bunch of dadgum data. They want to teach kids. So they just throw their hands up and go, I'm done, I'm out of here. So don't be, I've got tons of interviews with teachers saying that same thing. So anybody who wants to say that I'm making that up, you're wrong. But the thing that's really bothersome, and that follows up on what you're saying, Amanda, is we just got an $8 million grant to put Teach for America teachers in the classrooms because we don't have enough people in the classroom to teach. Would you like to know who change agents are? Look up Teach for America. Okay. Look up Teach for America. I can't tell you the number of Teach for America teachers who are it's all woke all the time. And these are the people who are going to be in the classrooms. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Just a second. I'm going to pass it to you. I'm not going to hold it.
How long have these questionnaires been happening in the public schools?
The YRBS has been going on for, probably 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was asking that because for some reason, of course, there's been a lot of water under the bridge since I went to school, but I vaguely remember questionnaires similar to that back in the 60s and 70s in school.
Oh gosh, maybe they've been going back that long. Ugh. Okay, did I scare everybody? Nobody wants to ask a question? I'm just so mad nobody wants to talk to me.
I'm not going to ask a question, but the term equity.
Yeah.
That's just a soft sell of communism. Think about the thing of communism, everyone according to his abilities and all that. That's just communism. That's just a soft sell term for introducing that concept.
Well, and here's the other thing that's important to remember. Patrice Cullors, who was, very high up in the BLM scaffolding, who apparently now has millions of dollars of homes somewhere in California. But at any rate, she said numerous times I am a trained Marxist. So what she said, I am a trained Marxist. At that point, it's not about racial equality, it's about communism. It's about ushering in communism. And this whole notion of racial equality was invented by the Marxists because they know it divides people and it scares people. And so it's very, very easy then to take over populations by ripping black people and white people apart. And it should never happen. And the thing of it is it's up to us not to allow that to happen. It's up to us to say, no, we're Christians. We don't believe that. And we're not falling into that. We're all one under Christ. End of discussion.
I may be misunderstanding, but everything you showed us tonight is current and
Yes, ma'am.
accurate. And do we have elected officials working to change the wording in these things and working to change these organizations that are
here's
leading
what I
these
did.
things?
Here's what I did, because my contention after looking at all of this was the State Department of Education is breaking the law, HB 1775, by putting this stuff on their website. It's just flat. There's no way around it. They're breaking the law. So I sent it to the Secretary of Education. I sent it to both of the senator and the member of the House, the representative that wrote 1775. And then I sent it to every single board member, and I sent it to Joy just for good measure. So everybody has a copy of it, and I don't care if they like it or not. It doesn't bother me, and it doesn't bother me if they like me or not. The point of the matter is we're either a nation of laws or we're not a nation of laws. And if you're going to have the highest people going, like school boards, like superintendents, don't need to follow the law. I'm done with this. We've got to make people follow. Who are going to make people follow the law if we're not going to make people follow the law? I'm sick of being the only one following the law. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell at you.
I could yell back, but I'll refrain.
I haven't had enough social emotional learning.
I guess what I want to follow up with is, okay, so you've notified all of these people. What's the response? What's their response?
Secretary Walters did respond, and we're going to have a discussion about it. I've not heard anything. I wouldn't imagine that I would hear anything from the superintendent, but I have not heard anything from any of the board members. And I did hear from Senator Bullitt. I haven't talked to Representative West yet, but I'm sure that'll happen. What we need to do, and what you guys need to help me to do, is you need to say, hey, she's the one who spent 3 days ferreting this stuff out. I'm going to go take it to everybody I know and make a big stink about it. Because what happens is laws die in the dark because nobody does anything about them. You guys need to leave and go, wait, this has got to stop. I'm going to contact my representative. I'm going to talk to the school board. I'm going to make a big stink about it because this isn't right. It's simply not right.
I think, Jenny, what happens is so many people don't know what to do. We don't know as far, like attorneys, we don't know where to turn as far as attorneys, and then what kind of attorney do you need? And, it would be great if we had a sugar daddy, kind of like the left does. But, if we had somebody that could, that would, kind of help us in those areas, because I think there are a lot of people that are very frustrated and don't know what to do. And really the only thing that we can do is sue them.
Honestly, it's down to the point where I don't think we have any choice. But I will say this. One of the things that they told me about Common Core, I had numerous representatives say, nobody's ever done this before. I mean, because one of the things that my poor mother had to put up with me was just hard-headedness. I am one of the hardest-headed people you'll ever meet. And in some ways, that's good. And in some ways, I'll just put my head down and do what needs to be done until it gets done. And that's how... Yeah, and that's exactly, I got something good out of it. And so there, we can affect change. Ooh, that didn't, we're not change agents, but we can change these things that are happening to us. But again, it's going to be a lot of numbers, people coming together to do this, people writing letters. And I think we're conditioned to McDonald's. You know, if it doesn't happen in 15 seconds and we can't come out of a drive-through and it's done, we don't want to do it. And the problem is guys, we're so far into the pit of Marxism that we are literally on the brink of communism. And if this thing with the vaccines goes through, that will really, I truly believe, be the ushering in of literal communism. We're that far down. So we either look at where we are and reasonably, rationally assess that and say, I know where I am. And it's easy to give up. I mean, I've thought about that before, you know, and I think because it's tiring doing this stuff. It is. But, you know, every time I think about quitting, I think, you know what? I'm hard-headed enough to die with my boots on. I just can't, you know, I can't seed the ground and die that way. I mean, I can't. I'll just die fighting. That's my personality. So I think there's some good methods to follow in the handout that I gave you. If you'll follow those, but then get people to help you, don't just do it by yourself. Go to school and make these parents help you do this. But do you realize that all of us pay taxes? People don't understand this. Where does schools get funded in like 15 different sources. But what's the major source for school funding? Which is what? Yeah, see, people say ad valorem tax, and they go, what's that? It's property tax. See, I don't know if you guys know this story or not, but way back in like the 1600s, people kind of got mad in Europe that the king could own their land, and so they decided to get on a few boats and come over here because they didn't want the king owning their land. And now guess what we have? The king owning our land. And not only does the king own our land so that we can't own our own property, but they're using our own money to propagandize our children against us. How do you not understand that? Again, I'm sorry for me. Get a little spooled up. Any other questions? And then we probably better go. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for your great presentation. Thank you very much for your great presentation. I don't know how to summarize my thoughts to about a minute, but I would just say that I hope this isn't people's first exposure to some of this. But if it is, I'm happy that they've been exposed to it. But if you're thinking about fighting this, don't be looking for a victory in 6 months or a year or 5 years or 10 years. If I didn't think there was any hope to resist the slide to communism, I wouldn't be here. So I'm not 100% resigned to the loss of our American Republic, but the battle against the Marxist takeover of education, it took them generations really to get much effect, to get traction into the classroom. I mean, John Dewey, you got to go back to the 49ers, and then John Dewey wrote the book, The School and Society, in 1899, not 1999. You know, he created the Columbia University College of Education over 100 years ago. The Frankfurt School escaped.
Still churns out people.
The Frankfurt School escaped Germany, escaped execution from Hitler in like 1934. So they escaped execution in Austria in 1935. Where did they come? Here. Columbia University School of Education, and then throughout the United States universities and colleges of education. Okay, but I was just going to say, get up a critical mass of people. We need to fight. We need to create an army. But the first thing you'll see is if we have 500 to 1,000 people who would really start calling legislators, Joy Hoffmeister's office, their superintendents, go to their school board meetings, what you'll see is you'll see something happen.
Yes.
You'll see, for one thing you'll see happen is Joy Hoffmeister will go, she'll have a news conference, and she'll go to a blackboard, and she'll draw a big circle, and she'll write the letters S-E-L, and then she'll draw a big line through the S-E-L, and she'll say, I didn't have any idea this was so bad, and how much concern there was. And so we're just not going to do this anymore. I lose, you win, go away happy. And believe it, this has been done over and over and over. Believe me, this fight against transformational affective education, it's been done before.
Oh,
it took, the move from didactic teaching of cognitive learner outcomes to transformational affective education was a gradual thing.
The state superintendent is up for election in 2022. Yeah. Hoffmeister is termed out. We have candidates already announced. We need to understand who these people are. We need to question them thoroughly. And then if we can find someone that we can support, we need to be active in supporting that person.
Well, and I think that's such a good point, because does anybody know what vetting a candidate means? How many of us vet a candidate? Or do you just go, oh my gosh, he's running, he's kind of, oh, he's cute, and well, he does this, and people, if you question them enough, you'll find a glitch somewhere, and then that will be in your end. But if you're just going to sit there and go, well, he looks like he'll do fine, we for some reason, we Republicans have been the absolute worst. And I think it goes back to that Reagan quote about Republicans, which is just, I think it was even taken out of context. We were terrible about that. We absolutely should demand accountability from any elected official, including those that wear an R. Okay.
Hi, I've never been to 912 before, and this is my first time. And I've known about you, but this is interesting that I was moved to bring this book from the library because I didn't know what you were going to talk about. But there's low-hanging fruit. I know you're talking about policy and elections. I've lost faith in elections, but here's some low-hanging fruit. Reading lists. You can tell what they're teaching if you get your reading list, and that should be in your house and accessible tonight. You don't have to go through anybody. I love the library, but I heard about this from one of my alternative news sources. He mentioned this book and the author, so I went to see, gee, I wonder if the Tulsa Public Library has it, because they've been having some pretty subversive stuff on their website lately for kids to read. This was a book called Not My Idea, and it's in big print, so you don't really know what it's about. But then the little headline, subheadline, a book about whiteness. And I put little tabs in if you want me to stay, because you could read it in about 2 or 3 minutes. It's for very, very young children. Here's an example of something I tabbed. Whiteness is a bad deal. It always was. Dude, we can see your pointy tail. Contract binding you to whiteness, you get stolen land, stolen riches, special favor. You can be white without signing on to whiteness. Innocence is overrated. Knowledge is power. Get some, grow wise, make history. This is how to be an activist for a 4 and a 5, 6, 7-year-old in elementary school. It has pictures in here. The visual subversion is, it's clever because it's attacking a white girl as the setting with her mom, and she's beginning to question racism and stuff. And it has the American flag and Christian symbolism equated to evil and racism. I'll stay if you want to look at this, but I've been checking it out of the library so nobody else can. And that's what you do. You go for the low-hanging fruit. You start complaining to the library. You go check out the books so your kids can't do it. Start finding out what they're reading and complain, and that's instant. And then you can start stirring some people up.
We've actually been on reading lists for 12 years. And my very first article for the Federalist was, "Don't let your kids read smut." And it was about reading lists in Edmond and West Virginia, and a friend of mine in Wisconsin who all had kids who were reading Glass Houses and The Bluest Eye and all of those things that were just completely developmentally appropriate for kids in high school. Okay, I think she's trying to get me off. Oh, okay. I can stay?
No, I just wanted to say, we were told that in the school libraries, just go in the school library and look at the books.
Yes.
And we went to the school board meeting in Sapulpa, just one, and we questioned that. And one of the board members said, "Well, we have to be conscious of the children that live in these homes. We can't hurt their feelings. We can't come against everything." That was their answer to this. So just go and look at the school library.
I just wanted to add too, because you mentioned, I could tell you're Christian, and I'm sure many people in here are, but one of the things about the gentleman over there, he was talking about it'll take a long time. One of the comforts I have as a Christian is knowing that God just told me not to be weary in doing good. It's not up to me. I'm not responsible for the outcome. That's God, and He, in His sovereignty, will take care of the outcomes. It's for us to do the right thing. Locally, start in our family, and if we can expand the sphere, but we're not responsible, so we don't have to burn ourselves out, and we just keep doing the right thing every day.
You're right. Absolutely. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
So, real quick, we talked earlier about the importance of school board elections, and on September 18th, the Tulsa Republican Party is going to put on a campaign boot camp for anyone that is wanting to run for school board or even a city council race. My goal as the chair is to focus on just our community. So I'm going to focus on the school board, and I'm going to focus on the Tulsa City Council next year. So if you know of anybody that is thinking about running or is going to run through Eventbrite, you can sign up. The cost is $25, but that does include your lunch, and it will be from 9 until 2 on September the 18th, which is a Saturday. Listen, guys, we got to take back the school board. We got to take back the city council. That's where we're going to be able to make the greatest difference in our communities. And with this Tulsa school board, and you guys are going to hear it from me until we're done with the elections. Tulsa Public Schools has 2 school board seats available that are up for re-election. I want to take both of those seats. If we can take both of those seats, we have a Republican on the school board. That gives us 3 of the 7, and Jeanette Marshall usually votes along with what's right. Okay, so we can almost count on her as being an almost Republican. City Council, all 9 seats are up for a re-election. 3 of them are Republicans. I'm not going after Republicans. I'm going after Democrat seats. I want 3 of those seats. If we can flip it and make it a 6-3 city council, we won't have to put up with the crap of showing up at City Hall so that we can fight against mask mandates or whatever other mandates or things that they're trying to throw our way. And we can actually stand up for our police officers, because with the way that it is, the way the council is now, our police really don't have any backup and support. And so I think that it's important that we take those seats. So you're going to hear a lot about it. It's going to take money. It's going to take people getting involved, and it's going to take good candidates out there running. So if you know of anybody wanting to run, please send them my way, and I'd be happy to talk to them. And if you know of anybody that might be interested in that boot camp, it's going to be September the 18th. So if anybody has any questions about that, I'll stick around. If you want the PowerPoint of what Jenny just gave you, make sure that we have your email address. Please write legibly, because I'm the one that has to decipher it. And I'll make sure that you guys get it. And just be careful. Go home. Have a good evening. And thank you so much for coming out again tonight.